The studio lights were brighter than usual that morning, almost blinding. Cameras rolled silently across the polished floor of the set of The View. The audience buzzed with anticipation, unaware that the next few minutes would become one of the most talked-about talk show moments of the year. But the moment the guests stepped onto the stage, something in the atmosphere shifted. It was Jennifer Lawrence, Academy Award winner, outspoken Hollywood star, and one of the most unpredictable personalities in the industry. Her smile was warm, but her eyes carried the kind of intensity that suggested today's interview might not follow the usual friendly script. Across the table sat veteran host Whoopi Goldberg, calm and composed as always. A legend of television and film, Whoopi had built a reputation for asking tough questions while keeping the conversation sharp and engaging. The audience clapped enthusiastically as Jennifer took her seat. But what no one realized was that the conversation about to unfold would send shockwaves through the studio. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping moment, make sure to subscribe to Talk Battles, hit the like button, and drop a comment below if you love dramatic celebrity stories like this. Trust me, this one gets intense. Jennifer leaned forward slightly as the cameras zoomed in. Whoopi smiled professionally. Jennifer, it's great to have you here. You've had an incredible career, and now with your latest project making headlines, everyone's talking about you again. Jennifer nodded. Her newest film, No Hard Feelings, had recently sparked conversation across Hollywood. Known for her powerful performances in films like Silver Linings Playbook and the global blockbuster franchise The Hunger Games, Jennifer had long been celebrated for blending raw emotion with sharp humor. But today, the mood felt different. Your fans love that you're so honest, Whoopi continued. But sometimes honesty can get complicated in Hollywood. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. The audience chuckled lightly, sensing the hint of tension. Complicated how? Jennifer asked, her tone calm but curious. Whoopi folded her hands. Well, you've been outspoken about the industry, about pay gaps, about politics, about creative control. Some people admire that. Others think it creates unnecessary controversy. A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Jennifer leaned back slightly, considering the comment. You mean controversy like speaking honestly? She asked. The audience reacted with a mix of laughter and surprise. Whoopi smiled, but it was a careful smile. Well, she replied, sometimes people think actors should focus on acting. Jennifer's eyes sharpened. And just like that, the energy shifted. What had started as a routine promotional interview was beginning to feel like something else entirely. Jennifer crossed her arms, her voice steady. I think people should focus on telling the truth, she said. The audience clapped lightly, but the tension was now unmistakable. Whoopi leaned forward. Truth can look different depending on who's telling it, she said. Jennifer tilted her head slightly. Sure, she replied, but ignoring problems doesn't make them disappear. A few audience members gasped softly. The exchange had gone from friendly banter to pointed conversation in seconds. But the real shock was still coming. Whoopi decided to steer the conversation toward Jennifer's life beyond Hollywood. You've had a fascinating journey, she said. From a teenager in Kentucky to one of the biggest stars in the world. What do you remember most about those early days? Jennifer smiled briefly, the tension easing for a moment. I remember feeling completely lost, she admitted. I was just a kid who loved acting. I never imagined I'd end up winning an Oscar or starring in something like The Hunger Games. The audience applauded warmly. Jennifer continued, her voice softening. My family kept me grounded. My parents never let me believe the hype. They always reminded me that fame isn't the same thing as happiness. Whoopi nodded thoughtfully. That's a lesson a lot of people in Hollywood learn too late. Jennifer looked down for a moment, reflecting. I've had incredible moments, she said. Winning the Oscar for Silver Linings Playbook. Falling on the stairs on the way up. The audience burst into laughter, remembering the iconic moment. Jennifer laughed too. That pretty much sums up my life, she joked. But just as the mood began to lighten, Whoopi asked a question that stopped the room cold. Do you ever think, she said slowly, that Hollywood might be getting tired of the drama around you? The audience gasped. Jennifer froze. For a split second, the studio went completely silent. The cameras zoomed closer. Jennifer slowly turned toward Whoopi. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, but unmistakably sharp. Drama, she repeated. And suddenly, the interview was no longer just an interview. It was a confrontation, and the audience could feel it building. Part 2 coming next. The tension explodes as Jennifer responds in a way no one expected. The silence in the studio hung heavy after that single word. Drama. Jennifer Lawrence repeated the word slowly, almost tasting it, as if deciding what it really meant in that moment. The audience inside the studio of The View shifted uneasily in their seats. Something about the tone of the conversation had changed. Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg remained composed, her posture straight and professional. She had hosted thousands of interviews in her career. She had faced uncomfortable questions and even uncomfortable guests. But Jennifer's reaction suggested this moment might become one of those unforgettable television exchanges people talk about for years. Jennifer leaned slightly forward in her chair, the studio lights reflecting in her eyes. "Are you asking if Hollywood is tired of me speaking my mind?" she asked calmly. The audience murmured again. Whoopi raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm asking," she replied carefully, "whether the constant headlines, the outspoken opinions, the controversies, ever make you wonder if it affects how people see you in the industry." Jennifer let out a quiet laugh. Not an amused laugh. A sharp one. "You mean whether people think I'm difficult," she said. A few audience members gasped softly. Whoopi didn't deny it. Instead, she nodded slightly. "Well, some people have said that." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. Jennifer's expression hardened, but her voice stayed steady. "Let me tell you something," she said. "When a woman in Hollywood stands up for herself, she's difficult. When she talks about pay equality, she's dramatic. But when a man does it, he's powerful." The audience erupted into applause. Even some of the production crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. The moment felt raw, unscripted, electric. Whoopi leaned back slightly, watching Jennifer closely. "You're talking about the pay gap controversy?" she asked. Jennifer nodded. Years earlier, Jennifer had spoken openly about the pay differences between male and female actors in Hollywood. After starring in massive franchises like The Hunger Games and winning an Oscar for Silver Linings Playbook, she had become one of the most influential voices in the industry. But that influence had also brought criticism. Jennifer clasped her hands together. "Look, I love acting," she said. "I love storytelling. That's why I got into this business in the first place. But when you realize the system isn't fair, staying quiet isn't really an option anymore." The audience listened closely now, completely absorbed. Whoopi tapped her fingers lightly on the table. "You've also said Hollywood pressures actors to be perfect," she added. Jennifer smiled slightly. "That's because it does," she replied. "Perfect body, perfect image, perfect answers. But the truth is nobody is perfect." She paused for a moment, then added quietly, "And I'm definitely not." A ripple of laughter passed through the audience. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. "You know, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was just a teenager from Kentucky," she continued. "I didn't know anything about the industry. I didn't know how to play the game." She glanced briefly at Whoopi. "And honestly, I still don't." The audience chuckled again. Whoopi smiled slightly, acknowledging the honesty. "But you've had extraordinary success," she said. "Blockbuster franchises, awards, global fame. That's not something many actors achieve." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "I'm grateful for all of it," she said sincerely. "Every film, every opportunity. Even the awkward moments, like tripping on the Oscar stairs." The audience laughed loudly at the memory. "That moment actually changed how people saw me," Jennifer added. "They realized I was just a normal person who happened to be wearing a very expensive dress." The laughter grew louder, but the conversation soon drifted back toward the tension that had sparked earlier. Whoopi's tone shifted again. "But some critics say," she said carefully, "that outspoken celebrities sometimes overshadow their own work." Jennifer blinked slowly. "And you think I've done that?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Whoopi shrugged slightly. "I'm asking what you think." Jennifer stared at her for a moment, then let out a breath. "You know what I think," she said. The audience leaned forward. "I think people are more comfortable when actresses stay quiet." Applause broke out again. Jennifer continued, her voice stronger now. "I've made movies that audiences love. I've worked incredibly hard. But somehow the conversation always shifts to whether I'm too loud or too honest." She shook her head slightly. "That's exhausting." The studio went quiet again. Whoopi studied Jennifer's face carefully. For a brief moment, the tension felt personal rather than professional. But then Whoopi said something that reignited the spark. "Well," she said slowly, "some viewers might say you're reacting a little strongly to a simple question." A collective gasp swept through the audience. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. "Strongly," she repeated. She leaned forward again, her voice suddenly more intense. You asked if Hollywood is tired of me. The audience fell silent. Jennifer's next words landed with unmistakable force. I think the real question is, why are successful women always expected to apologize for their success? The audience exploded into applause. Even some people standing backstage started clapping. Whoopi raised her hands slightly, half smiling as if acknowledging the reaction. Now that, she said, is a conversation worth having. But the exchange had already become far more heated than anyone expected. And the tension between the two women was only growing. Because the next question Whoopi asked would push the conversation past the point of no return. And when Jennifer responded, the audience inside the studio would gasp louder than they had all morning. Part 3 coming next, and this is where the confrontation truly explodes. The applause slowly faded, but the tension in the studio didn't. It lingered in the air like static before a lightning strike. The audience inside the View could feel it. Something bigger than a normal interview was unfolding in front of them. Jennifer Lawrence sat still for a moment, her hands resting on the table, but her expression had changed. The light humor that had appeared earlier was gone. Now there was something more serious in her eyes. Across from her, Whoopi Goldberg adjusted slightly in her chair. As a veteran host, she understood when conversations shifted into dangerous territory, and this one had already crossed that line. But backing down wasn't really her style either. Whoopi leaned forward again, speaking carefully but firmly. You know, Jennifer, she began, a lot of viewers admire your honesty. But some people also wonder if Hollywood conversations are becoming more about politics and personal battles than about the work itself. A few audience members exchanged glances. Jennifer tilted her head slightly. So talking about fairness is politics now? She asked quietly. Whoopi shrugged lightly. For some people, it is. Jennifer exhaled slowly. For a moment, she didn't say anything. The silence stretched long enough that even the camera operators seemed unsure where the conversation would go next. Finally, Jennifer spoke again, her voice calmer, but deeper. You know what's interesting? She said. When I first started acting, I thought the hardest part would be the work. Long hours. Auditions. Rejections. She smiled faintly. But that wasn't the hardest part. The audience listened closely. The hardest part, she continued, was realizing how much pressure there is to stay quiet. A murmur moved through the crowd. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice becoming more emotional. I remember filming The Hunger Games, she said. That movie changed my life. Suddenly I had fans all over the world. Kids dressing up like Katniss. Messages from people saying the character made them feel brave. Her expression softened as she spoke about it. That meant everything to me, she added. The audience clapped softly. But success also changes the way people treat you, Jennifer continued. Every word you say becomes a headline. Every opinion becomes a controversy. Whoopi nodded slowly. That's part of fame, she said. Jennifer looked directly at her. But does that mean I'm supposed to stop being honest? The audience responded with scattered applause again. Whoopi held up a hand slightly, as if trying to keep the conversation balanced. No, she replied. But sometimes the audience wants to hear about the art, the movies, the work. Jennifer laughed again, but this time the laugh carried frustration. Then let's talk about the work, she said. She straightened in her chair. My latest film, No Hard Feelings, was one of the most fun projects I've done in years, she said. It reminded me why I fell in love with acting in the first place. Comedy, storytelling, connecting with people. The audience clapped warmly. Jennifer continued, her voice softening again. Sometimes we forget that actors are human beings, she said. We have families. We have fears. We have embarrassing moments. She grinned slightly, like falling up the stairs at the Oscars. The audience burst into laughter again, remembering the viral moment when she won Best Actress for Silver Linings Playbook. Jennifer shook her head. That moment followed me for years, she joked. People thought I planned it. Whoopi chuckled. Well, it was unforgettable television. Jennifer nodded. But that's the thing, she said. Real life is messy. Fame is messy. And pretending everything is perfect just makes it worse. For a moment, the conversation seemed to soften again. But then Whoopi leaned forward and asked something that instantly reignited the tension. So if you believe in being honest, she said, let me ask you something honestly. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. Okay. Whoopi paused briefly before speaking. Do you think Hollywood owes you something? The studio went silent again. A collective gasp moved through the audience. Jennifer blinked in disbelief. Owes me something? She repeated slowly. Whoopi nodded. You've spoken about fairness, pay gaps, representation. Some critics say it sounds like you think the industry hasn't given you enough. Jennifer stared at her for a moment. Then she leaned forward, her voice suddenly sharper than it had been all day. Are you serious right now? The audience reacted instantly, some gasping, some whispering. Jennifer continued before Whoopi could respond. I've been incredibly lucky in my career, she said firmly. I've worked with amazing directors. I've won awards. I've been part of films that changed my life. Her voice grew stronger. But speaking about fairness doesn't mean I'm ungrateful. Applause erupted again. Jennifer's eyes flashed with intensity. It means I want the next generation of actors to have a better system than the one we inherited. The audience clapped even louder. Whoopi listened carefully, her expression thoughtful but firm. Well, she said slowly, that's certainly one way to see it. Jennifer leaned back, clearly frustrated now. One way, she repeated. The room fell quiet again. Jennifer looked around at the audience, then back at Whoopi. You know what surprises me? She said. What? Whoopi asked. Jennifer's voice dropped into a calm but powerful tone. That people still act shocked when women refuse to stay silent. The audience exploded into applause, louder than at any point during the interview. Even some members of the production team behind the cameras were shaking their heads in disbelief at how intense the exchange had become. Whoopi finally leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. Well, she said with a half smile, I think we've definitely moved beyond a normal interview. Jennifer nodded. That's one way to put it. But the moment everyone in the studio would remember forever was still about to happen, because the final minutes of the conversation were about to take an even more dramatic turn. One that would send social media into a frenzy and leave the audience completely stunned. And when the show ended, the aftermath would spread far beyond the studio walls. Part 4 would soon reveal what happened next. The energy inside the studio of The View had changed completely. What had begun as a routine promotional interview had transformed into something raw, unpredictable, and intensely real. Even the audience could feel that the moment unfolding in front of them was no longer just television. It was history in the making. Jennifer Lawrence sat quietly for a second after her last remark. Her expression showed a mixture of exhaustion and determination, as if she had finally said something she'd been holding in for years. The applause from the audience slowly faded, but the tension remained. Across the table, Whoopi Goldberg watched her carefully. Whoopi had been in the spotlight for decades. She had seen interviews spiral out of control, arguments erupt, and emotional moments unfold on live television. But even she seemed slightly surprised by how intense this conversation had become. For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. The silence felt enormous. Finally, Whoopi broke it. You know, she said slowly, this is exactly why people watch shows like this. Real conversations. Real disagreements. Jennifer looked at her, still serious but calmer now. Yeah, she replied quietly. But sometimes real conversations make people uncomfortable. A few audience members clapped softly in agreement. Whoopi nodded. That's true, she admitted. But discomfort can also lead to understanding. Jennifer leaned back slightly, taking a breath. The emotional edge in her voice softened. I never came here to fight, she said. I came here to talk about my work, and maybe share a little honesty. Whoopi raised her hands gently in a gesture of acknowledgement. And you did, she said. Very clearly. The audience chuckled lightly, easing the tension for the first time in several minutes. Jennifer smiled faintly. I just think people sometimes misunderstand what actors are trying to say, she added. When we talk about fairness or challenges in the industry, it's not about complaining. It's about improving things. Whoopi nodded again. That's a fair point. For the first time since the confrontation began, the tone between them felt less combative and more reflective. Jennifer glanced briefly toward the audience. You know, she said, when I started acting, I never expected my life to turn into this huge public conversation. I was just a kid who loved movies. She smiled slightly as she remembered those early days. I used to watch films and imagine myself inside those stories. That's why projects like The Hunger Games meant so much to me. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a story about courage. The audience applauded warmly. And then there are projects like No Hard Feelings, she continued, which reminded me that acting can also just be fun. A few people laughed. Jennifer shrugged playfully. Sometimes people forget that actors like to laugh too. Whoopi smiled. That's something audiences appreciate. Jennifer's expression grew thoughtful again. And honestly, she said, some of my favorite memories aren't even from the movies themselves. They're from the people I've met along the way. Fans who tell me a character inspired them, kids who say Katniss made them feel brave. The audience clapped again. Jennifer's voice softened slightly. Those moments matter more than awards or headlines. Whoopi leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. That's something I've learned too, she said. After decades in this industry, the real memories come from the connections you make. Jennifer nodded slowly. For a moment, the earlier confrontation seemed to fade into the background. But outside the studio, something else was already happening. While the conversation was still airing, clips from the intense exchange were spreading across social media. Within minutes, viewers online were debating every word that had been spoken. Some praised Jennifer's boldness. Others defended Whoopi's tough questions. Entertainment reporters were already drafting headlines about the dramatic moment on The View. Inside the studio, however, the conversation was approaching its final moments. Whoopi glanced toward the camera. Well, she said with a small smile, I think this might be one of the most memorable interviews we've had in a while. The audience laughed and applauded. Jennifer chuckled softly. Probably not the calmest one. Definitely not, Whoopi replied. Both women shared a brief smile. Not exactly agreement, but mutual respect after a heated exchange. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the show prepared to move toward its closing segment. But the audience was still buzzing. Some people were whispering excitedly, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the confrontation they had just witnessed. Jennifer stood from her chair as the applause began to build again. Before walking off stage, she turned back toward the audience one last time. Thanks for listening, she said simply. The crowd responded with a loud standing ovation. Backstage, producers were already talking rapidly, aware that the interview would likely dominate entertainment headlines for days. Within hours, clips of the exchange would rack up millions of views online. Comment sections would explode with debates. Was Jennifer justified in her reaction? Was Whoopi simply doing her job as a host? One thing was certain. The moment had captured something rare on television, an unscripted clash of perspectives between two powerful voices. And audiences couldn't stop talking about it. Now we want to hear your opinion. Do you think Jennifer Lawrence was right to respond so strongly, or do you think Whoopi Goldberg was simply asking the tough questions every host should ask? Tell us in the comments below. And if you love dramatic celebrity stories, shocking interviews, and unforgettable talk show moments, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Talk Battles, because we bring you the most explosive stories from the world of celebrities and talk shows.